Hi guys, this is Billy with the OutdoorsMissouri.com, and today we're going to be taking apart the Marlin 60 trigger group and putting it back together. Um, there's a lot of videos of taking the Marlin 60 apart, but none of them are on the... only one that I know of is taking the trigger group apart, and even that, they don't talk about how to put it back together. So today I'm going to take it apart. I'm going to show you how I take it apart, and then I'm going to show you how I put the trigger group back together. Now, if you don't know mechanics, and if you're not detail oriented, the Marlin 60 is probably one of the toughest trigger groups I've ever dealt with. So I'm going to go ahead and come back to you as soon as I've gotten to the trigger group. Okay, and we're back. So I took the stock off. Now I'm going to push this pin out here. And then there's your trigger group. That's the part that I'm talking about. That's the part that we're going to totally take apart and put back together right here. Okay, this part, it definitely needs clean, but it can wait for now. Okay, so I wanted to show this paper here because if you go to the 80s podcast channel, that's where I got this from. He sent me through email, and on one of his videos, if you check out his Marlin video, he offers to send this to you as well. So I want to give a shout out to the dude there because he really saved my bacon on this one. Okay, so make sure you get a print out of this. And here's your trigger group. And the way that it comes apart is it has these little E-clips. Now, I went ahead and bought some new ones for it just because they were a little bit worn out. There's the receipt. So you can see that they're really expensive. I don't know if you can see that, but I paid a total of 12 cents a piece. So it wasn't, they were cheap, okay? And so they're right there, and there's only 3 of them. Look at that little guy. He wants to learn too. Okay. So magnetized screwdriver, really important. It helps out a bunch. And the other thing, before you even attempt this, is this part is under a lot of tension. So I made me a little hook. Okay? And I'm going to put it in the back side of this so that when we do let this go, it doesn't go flying everywhere. And I like to go ahead and spring it tight so that that doesn't have any chance to fall out while we're taking it apart. See how it's in there? And it won't go anywhere. Make sure you do that because that thing's a mess. Okay? So now I'm just going to push these clips out. See how that grabbed on? They're tiny. Okay? And the other thing that I messed up on is waving this around while these were hanging out. It'll pick them up. So we want to put these in an empty drawer somewhere. This will work. So that they don't get lost. Because it's just easier to not lose stuff. So there's E-clip number 2 and E-clip number 3. There it is. Now you don't have to take this one off to get it apart. But what I would recommend so that you don't overspring this spring here is go ahead and get that puppy off. Do that now. Okay? And then it's going to just lift right off. Just like that. Whoop. Okay? So, and don't even worry about how it comes apart because I'm going to show you how to put it back together. It's relatively simple to take apart. Most things are until you go to put it back together. Now, on the 80s podcast channel, he talks about how to get this push rod out. And I'm not going to do that. I'm not really too interested in taking this push rod out. It's not bothering me any. So I'm just going to leave it. But if you haven't cleaned this before, it'd be a good time. This would be a good time to start cleaning all your parts. As you can see, I've done a little bit of work. It's really shiny to that part and to this part as well. I've done some work to kind of lighten up the trigger a little bit. Okay. This thing gets really dirty, and I like to spray it. Personally, not everybody's going to agree with me on this one, but I like to spray with WD-40. I know it's not the best gun cleaning lubricant, but it does break down the gunpowder a little bit. You can brush it. It resists rust. And I know I'm going to give this a good wipe down afterwards before, I leave it, put it back in the gun. Because all these parts here, they don't need lubricated. You don't need to put any kind of oil on here. If you feel like you need to lubricate it, always lubricate your trigger stuff with heavy silicone. Heavy duty silicone is microscopic glass beads. So they really help on the friction, but that doesn't stick. Grease doesn't stick to it. When it dries clear. And there's no residue, and it is waterproof to an extent. So all this trigger stuff, a liberal amount of heavy duty silicone, and that's all I use. So now we're gonna put this back together. Okay. So the way I like to lay it down is with this push rod here facing up. Okay. And the first thing I put in is probably going to be, let's put this thing back in. This is the hammer here. That's the easiest thing to put back in, but you got to be careful because this little guy here wants to stick out, and if it sticks out when you're putting it back together, you're going to have a hard time putting it all the way back together. So we want to make sure that lays down as flat as possible. When you go to put this part in, and I don't know the technical names for these parts, but it's called this part. This is the part that I'm talking about. It goes in like so, and then you're only going to put it in a little bit, just the one side, and then you're going to put the spring in behind it. It's that spring with the little L in it, and it actually goes behind that so that trips properly. And then this spring here, this is what holds your closed bolt thing that holds it right there. That's going to go in too, and then we're going to move this down, work this down here so it sits nice and flush. It's not sitting flush though. There we go. It has to sit flush. Okay, so can we see that? Now I'm going to put this spring over that bump right there. Okay, so our sear, I believe that's the sear, is in place. Now this big old spring here, this actually rests on top of your feed ramp, or whatever they want to call it. And I've had to make me a little rig right here to make this happen. I don't know, like I said, I'm not a gunsmith or anything like that. I'm just a regular guy. I try to save myself a little bit of money by doing my own gun work. But I don't ever get into anything I can't handle. Or I try not to, put it that way. So I made this little rig here. All it is a little nail in the wood to hold this spring in place. Hold it about right up next to that, just like that, and then this guy goes in. And I think this is probably the most difficult part of putting this back together. Okay, then we're going to put that on there like that. Now it's all back together. Okay, so we're going to slide this guy in here like that. And now, this is also kind of tricky getting this spring on. I took a lot of time really trying to figure out the best way to put this back together. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to place it in line with where it's supposed to go. I'm going to start pushing it back together. Now we're having a little bit of an issue, and I see why. Our sear has risen up a little bit while we were messing with it. So we got to figure out a way to get that back down, because that's not going to work. See, when stuff is under spring pressure, it always changes everything. There we go. Oh, we're gonna lose that. Okay, that's down and that's down. Let's see if she goes back together now. Oops. There it is. Okay, so now we're going to get our E-clips. And start putting them in place, because this is under a little bit of spring tension. Not much, but it's enough to it'll come apart in your hands if you're not paying attention. Okay, once you get one or two in, you should be fine. And there's number 3 right here. And I'm trying not to make this an epic. There's guys that have 5-part videos on just how to take the Marlin apart, and they don't even take this trigger group apart. Okay, so now we got our 3 E-clips back on. Now we've got one more issue, and that's our little spring. Where did it go? There it is. Okay, we're going to cock this back. We're going to take our little hook out and then hook it. That's how I do that. We're going to hook that little spring and hook it back onto where it came from. Oh. Just like that. That's where it goes, right there. And you have now successfully taken apart the Marlin trigger group and put it back together. Thanks for watching, guys. If you have any ideas or requests, something you want to see, I don't own a bunch of firearms, but I have a few. I have the Ruger 1022, the Marlin 60, the Savage 64, and the Savage Edge that I know inside and out. So feel free to ask me any questions, leave a comment. Thanks for stopping by. Visit us at www.theoutdoorsmissouri.com. Thanks a lot.